Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. I hope you're all having a nice, relaxing weekend. I myself are having a fairly relaxed weekend, though I just couldn't help myself. I thought we haven't done a build for a while, so B450 boards coming out next week. Probably a good time to do a build video. Actually, speaking of the B450 motherboards, they weren't meant to be available to the public till the 31st of July, but for some reason, some retailers started selling them last week, so not sure what's going on there. Has to be said, quite an odd release from AMD, this one. So, while you could technically buy one right now and test it out for yourself, we are bound by multiple NDAs and can't show you a single benchmark. I can't talk about VRM thermals or anything like that, so this is mostly just a build video. That said, I'll be using the Ryzen 7 2700 on MSI's new B450 Tomahawk motherboard, and we'll be cooling it with the new Deep Cool Capsule 240mm all-in-one liquid cooler, and I will provide some CPU thermal results, so it won't be just a system build. Also along for the ride is MSI's new Radeon RX 580 Mech 2 8GB OC graphics card, so we can also check out how that performs in terms of thermals as well. All this new hardware will be going inside the new MSI Mag Pylon ATX case. And yes, this is a very MSI themed build, but no, it hasn't been sponsored by MSI. If they had sponsored this video, we would certainly make that clear. Accompanying all the new MSI hardware is ADATA's XPG Spectrix D41 RGB memory, and we have 4 8GB DDR4 3600 sticks. Then for the boot drive, we have the ADATA XPG GAMX S11 480GB NVMe SSD. So some seriously nice hardware there from ADATA. Finally, powering everything is the Seasonic Focus Gold 650W power supply, which will provide this build with more than enough juice. Okay, so enough chit chat. I reckon it's about time to cue up a smooth tune and get building. Okay, so that all went very smoothly. MSI's Pylon's very easy to work with, and I think with that ADATA XPG memory and the Deep Cool Castle all-in-one liquid cooler in there, I think with those two, it looks a bit special. But what about the temperatures, you say? Well, the MSI Pylon does leave a little to be desired when it comes to thermals. Thankfully, with some minor tweaks that you may have noticed already, you can improve things quite dramatically, which I suppose is both good and very disappointing at the same time, but we'll get to that in a moment. For testing, I left everything pretty much as you saw it in the video, but I did replace the two fans here with the two that I put up here because they're meant to go on the Castle 240mm radiator. So those fans were then put up here, so the top and the rear. So that's all I did there, so we could actually test the Castle with the intended fans. This did create a bit of a mismatch with the fans on the front of the case, which didn't look particularly nice, so I've changed that back and it didn't actually impact performance much anyway. You can adjust the RPM of all these fans, so overall it was very similar. Anyway, with this configuration, the Ryzen 7 at 2700 hit 63 degrees under full load in our hour-long blender stress test, which is pretty similar to what we see with the box cooler on an open test bed, so wasn't particularly impressed with those results. Having said that though, the Castle isn't to blame here, as you'll see soon, not the all-in-one liquid cooler's fault. Then playing Battlefield 1, we saw the CPU hit 49 degrees, which isn't actually too bad, and the MSI Radeon RX 580 Mech 2, that peaked at 81 degrees, which is pretty warm, even for an RX 580, so yeah, not a great temperature there for the graphics card. Though I should note the operating volume wasn't that bad. Unfortunately, I can't give you any scientific measurements because it's the weekend and it's not particularly quiet in my house. Anyway, those temperatures didn't impress me at all. I was honestly expecting much better results out of this system. And remember, the Ryzen 7 2700 processor isn't even overclocked. Something I noticed straight away when I unboxed the Pylon PC and then again when I was building in it was the very limited gap that was here. You can see it's been slightly modified now compared to the footage you probably saw earlier, though it might be difficult to see it from this angle. Anyway, the gap at the front was extremely small and very restrictive. And basically when you have such a small gap on a solid front panel pushed up right against three 120mm fans, they don't like that. It completely kills their efficiency and limits their ability to draw cool air into the case to then cool down everything in there. If I haven't mentioned it yet, the gap was just 6mm, so I couldn't even fit my pinky finger in the gap as it was out of the box. That being the case, I decided to retest, do everything all over again, but this time with the glass front panel completely removed, so we just had the dust filter on the front of the case. And I was expecting to see some noteworthy gains. I mean, we've got three 120mm fans, so I was expecting to see the operating temperatures of the CPU and GPU dropped a bit. I wasn't expecting them to drop by quite as much as they did. The idle temperature alone, that was dropped by 7 degrees, that's a fairly decent drop right there. But it was nothing like what we saw under load. The Ryzen 7 2700 in the hour-long blender workload saw the peak temperature drop by 22 degrees. So 22 degrees knocked off the load temperature in a room with an ambient air temperature of 21 degrees. In Battlefield 1, the CPU temperature was also reduced by 19 degrees this time, and the RX 580 saw a 6 degree drop, taking it down to a much more reasonable 75 degrees. These are obviously exceptional gains, and if I owned the Pylon and I saw this information, I would probably just decide to run it without the glass front panel on at all, because I can't imagine why you'd want your CPU to run 22 or 20 degrees hotter than it actually needs to. Anyway, the good news is you don't actually have to ditch the nice glass panel, you just have to increase the clearance, so do a little bit of modding. So I dug out some old CPU cooling gear. I had a couple of standoffs that were a bit taller, so I screwed them in, add some rubber washers, and then put these giant thumb screw things on the front, which I wouldn't recommend going with for a sort of a permanent setup, but for the purposes of doing this test and extending that 6mm gap to 18mm, they served the purpose just fine. Regardless of whether my little modification makes the case look worse or not, it's not really important here. What is important is that it didn't make the thermals any worse. In fact, it dramatically improved things. Incredibly, when compared to having no glass front panel at all, so the improved results that we just spoke of, so no glass panel at all, Adding the glass panel back but increasing the gap with my modification saw the CPU load temperature in the Blender hour-long workload increase by just 4 degrees. And then the Radeon RX 580, that increased by just a single degree, again over not having the glass panel at all. So yeah, with my modification, just a single degree was added to the graphics card. So impressive stuff there. And it means my dinky little modification that took me about, I don't know, 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds. The longest part was finding the bits. Anyway, that reduced the CPU load temperature by almost 30%, and it reduced the load temperature of the GPU by about 6%. So the Pylon was now cooler and quieter, so well worth tripling the size of the gap at the front of the case here, whether it looks better or worse. In my opinion, it really doesn't make much difference at all. It's a bit disappointing that MSI dropped the ball so badly here. It would have been an innovative feature, something that you don't really see that often if they had have thought to add some different size standoffs, some various sizes. Maybe you could go 6mm, which was the standard, 12mm, 18, maybe over 20, I don't know. Or maybe adjustable standoffs, so just one set of standoffs that can slide the glass panel in and out. That'd be pretty cool, and it'd be something that I don't think anyone else offers. So you'd be able to customize the look and the amount of airflow that you can get in the case, depending on what components you have in there. If you have a really low-end system, 6mm would be fine, but for a Ryzen 7 processor, 22-degree reduction by tripling the gap there. So I think it's well worth it. Anyway, that would be a unique feature that would be well worth adding to the Pylon 2. As for the Mech 2, yeah, pretty decent RX 580 graphics card. I haven't done a huge amount of testing. The thermals weren't overly impressive, but once we opened up the case 75 degrees, that's not too bad for an RX 580. If you guys want to see a teardown, a detailed review, I can certainly make that happen, so let me know in the comment section below. And that's going to do it for this one. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. Again, comments below, do all that good stuff. Subscribe for more content. And if you appreciate what we do at Unboxed, then maybe consider supporting us on Patreon. You can get access to our Discord chat and monthly live stream. That's all a heap of fun. Anyway, that is going to do it for this one. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time. Oh, I made it too far away.